Lance. The shovel hit something metallic 3 feet down, and Danny Carter knew his life was about to change forever. He had been digging fence posts on the abandoned Whitmore Ranch for less than an hour when the blade struck the object with a sound that didn't belong in Arizona soil, Lance. His hands trembled as he cleared away the red dirt, revealing a smooth, silver surface that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The ranch had been empty for 60 years, Lance. Old Man Whitmore disappeared in 1963, and nobody ever found out why. The property sat untouched, a ghost of the Old West, until the county finally put it up for auction, Lance. Danny bought it cheap, thinking he'd fix it up and raise cattle. Now he wished he'd left it alone. The metallic object was roughly the size of a coffin, perfectly preserved despite decades underground. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing faint blue in the harsh desert sun. Lance. Danny's pulse quickened. This wasn't some buried treasure from frontier days, Lance. This was something else entirely. He pulled out his phone to call the sheriff, then stopped. Lance. The symbols were changing, rearranging themselves into English letters right before his eyes. They formed a single word that made his blood run cold. Lance. Warning. Danny stumbled backward, dropping his shovel. Lance. The object began to hum, a low vibration that he felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. The ground around it started to crack, spiderwebs of fissures spreading outward from the burial site. He needed to run, needed to get back to his truck, but his legs wouldn't move. The surface of the object split open with a hiss of escaping air that smelled like ozone and copper. Lance. Inside, Danny could see another layer, this one made of something that looked like liquid mercury but held a solid form. More symbols appeared, scrolling faster than he could read, but he caught fragments. Lance. Containment breach. Biological hazard. Evacuation protocol. His paralysis broke. Danny turned and ran toward his pickup, boots kicking up dust as he sprinted across the hardpan. Lance. Behind him, the humming grew louder, joined by a high-pitched whine that hurt his ears. The truck seemed impossibly far away, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. Lance. He was 50 yards out when the explosion came. Not fire and debris, but a wave of pure energy that knocked him flat on his face. Lance. Danny tasted blood and dirt as he struggled to his knees, turning to look back at the dig site. Where the hole had been, there was now a perfect sphere of darkness, about 10 feet above the ground. Lance. It wasn't shadow. It was absence. A spot where reality had been cut away and replaced with nothing. Lance. And from that nothing, something was emerging. Part 2. The thing that crawled out of the void had too many limbs. Lance. Danny counted 6, then 8, then lost track as his brain refused to process what his eyes were showing him. It moved like a spider, but its body had the muscular bulk of something far more dangerous. Lance. Chitin plates covered most of its form, each one reflecting the sunlight in nauseating rainbow patterns. He forced himself to his feet and ran again. Lance. The truck was close now, just 30 yards. Behind him came a sound like wet meat being torn, followed by a shriek that seemed to vibrate in multiple frequencies at once. Lance. Danny didn't look back. Looking back would cost him precious seconds he didn't have. Lance. His hand found the truck door handle, yanked it open. He threw himself into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. Lance. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. Danny slammed the transmission into gear and floored the accelerator, sending a spray of gravel behind him as the tires found purchase. Lance. In the rearview mirror, he saw 3 more of the creatures emerge from the void. Lance. They moved with terrifying speed, their limbs propelling them across the desert floor like organic machines. One of them launched itself forward in a leap that covered 50 feet, landing where his truck had been parked just seconds earlier. Lance. Danny's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel as he navigated the dirt road away from the ranch. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Lance. He fumbled it out with one hand, keeping his eyes on the road. The screen showed 27 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. Lance. As he watched, it started ringing again. He answered it on speaker, not taking his hands off the wheel. Lance. Daniel Carter? The voice was female, crisp, military. Who is this? My name is Lieutenant Kate Morrison, United States Space Force. Lance. We've been monitoring unusual energy signatures in your area. Have you encountered anything abnormal at the Whitmore property? Danny laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Lance. You could say that. There are monsters coming out of a hole in my backyard. A pause on the other end. How many? 3. No, 4. Lance. They're fast. Really fast. Lance, get to the highway and head east. Don't stop for anything. Lance. We have a containment team en route, but they're 30 minutes out. What are these things? We don't have time for the full briefing, Mr. Carter. Lance. What I can tell you is that the Whitmore Ranch sits on top of a classified government installation that was sealed in 1963. Whatever you dug up, you just opened a door that was supposed to stay closed forever. Lance. Danny's mind reeled. A government installation in rural Arizona, buried for 60 years. Lance. The Cold War, the space race, and what had they been doing out here? The creatures are extraterrestrial, Morrison continued, her voice tight. Lance. We captured them in 1962 during an incident in New Mexico. They were supposed to be in stasis indefinitely. Lance. If they're awake now, it means the containment systems have failed. Lance. Why wasn't the property condemned? Why was it allowed to be sold? Budget cuts. Lance. Bureaucracy. Take your pick. Lance. The program that managed the site was defunded in 1998. The records were classified so deep that even the county assessor's office had no idea what they were sitting on. Danny hit the main road and turned east, pushing the truck to 70 miles per hour. In the mirror, he could see dust clouds rising from the ranch. The creatures were following. They're tracking me, he said. Lance. That's impossible. They're not intelligent enough for pursuit behavior. Lance. Well, someone forgot to tell them that. Morrison swore softly. The containment protocols included a tracking beacon. Lance. It's designed to stay with the primary witness in case of breach. You're tagged, Mr. Carter. Lance. They're following the signal. Tagged? Lance. How? When you opened the container, it released a microscopic transmitter cloud. You breathed it in. Lance. The particles bond to lung tissue and broadcast on a frequency the creatures are sensitive to. Danny's chest felt tight, and he didn't think it was just panic. Lance. How do I get it out? You don't. Not without medical intervention that we can't provide in the field. Lance. Your best option is to lead them away from populated areas until our team can neutralize the threat. Neutralize. Lance. You mean kill them? These are apex predators from a planet where gravity is 3 times Earth normal. Lance. They see in infrared. They can track prey across hundreds of miles, and their exoskeleton can withstand small arms fire. Yes, Mr. Carter, we need to kill them before they reach civilization. Lance. The highway stretched ahead, empty except for heat shimmer. Danny had maybe 20 miles before he hit the outskirts of Flagstaff. That's 20 miles to figure out how to survive being bait for alien monsters. What happened in '63, he asked. Lance. Why did Whitmore disappear? Another pause. He was the site supervisor. Lance. When the first containment breach occurred, he activated the burial protocol and sealed himself inside with the specimens. He saved a lot of lives. Lance. He's still down there? What's left of him is, yes. Danny felt sick. He'd been digging fence posts on top of a tomb, ignorant of the sacrifice buried beneath his boots. Now here he was, running for his life because he'd been too stupid to leave the past alone. How long do I have, he asked Lance. Based on their current speed, they'll overtake you in approximately 12 minutes. The terrain is working in your favor, but they're gaining fast. Lance. Our containment team is equipped with plasma rifles and sonic disruptors. If you can buy us another 18 minutes, we can save you. Lance. 18 minutes. Danny looked at the fuel gauge. Lance. 3/4 full. The road ahead was straight and flat. No cover, nowhere to hide. Lance. He had a hunting rifle in the rack behind his seat. A 30-06 that was good for deer and coyotes. Against armored alien predators, it would be about as effective as a slingshot. Lance. But he was human, and humans didn't give up easy. Part 3, Danny saw the old mining access road and made a split-second decision. Lance. He yanked the wheel hard right, sending the truck sliding onto the gravel track that led up into the hills. Morrison's voice crackled through the speaker, demanding to know what he was doing. Lance. Changing the game, he said. If they're tracking me anyway, I might as well pick the battlefield. Negative, Carter. Lance. Stay on the highway. Our team needs a clear approach vector. Lance. Your team is 18 minutes out. I've got maybe 8 before those things catch me. Lance. I'm not dying on a flat road with nowhere to hide. He killed the connection and focused on driving. Lance. The mining road was rough, full of switchbacks and washouts from spring floods. The truck bounced and rattled, suspension groaning with every impact. Lance. Behind him, dust rose in 4 separate plumes. The creatures had split up, flanking him on both sides of the road. Lance. They were learning, adapting. Lance. The road climbed toward an old copper mine that had been abandoned since the 70s. Danny had explored it once as a teenager, back when trespassing on dangerous property seemed like fun instead of stupidity. Lance. He remembered narrow passages, vertical shafts, unstable floors that could give way without warning. It was perfect. Lance. He pushed the truck harder, engine whining in protest as the grade increased. One of the creatures appeared on a ridge to his left, leaping from boulder to boulder with impossible agility. In the daylight, he could see more details. Its hide wasn't just chitin ants. There were patches that looked almost crystalline, refracting light in ways that hurt to look at. Eyes, multiple sets of them, tracked his movement with predatory focus. Lance. The creature gathered itself and jumped. Danny saw it coming, a ballistic arc that would land it directly on the truck's roof. Lance. He slammed the brakes. The creature overshot, hitting the road 10 feet ahead in a shower of sparks as its claws scraped asphalt. Lance. Danny jerked the wheel left and accelerated around it, close enough that he could smell the thing, a combination of burnt metal and rotting vegetation. 2 miles to the mine entrance. Lance. The road deteriorated into barely more than a path, forcing him to slow to 40 miles per hour. The creatures closed in, their pursuit sounds mixing with the truck's laboring engine. Danny could hear them now without the motor noise to mask it, clicks and whistles that might have been communication. The mine entrance appeared around a bend, a dark mouth in the hillside reinforced with rotting timber beams. Danny drove straight for it, not slowing until the last possible second. He hit the brakes hard, sending the truck into a controlled slide that stopped it sideways across the entrance. He grabbed the rifle, a flashlight, and the emergency kit from behind the seat, then bailed out the passenger door. The creatures were seconds behind him. Danny ran into the darkness of the mine, flashlight beam bouncing off wet stone walls. The main tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, shored up with old timbers that groaned and dripped. Side passages branched off every 100 feet, some blocked by cave-ins, others descending into black depths. He heard the first creature enter the mine, its claws clicking on stone. Danny turned down a side passage, moving as quickly as he dared in the confined space. The air was cool and damp, heavy with minerals and decay. His flashlight picked out rust-colored stains on the walls, old water damage, and something else. Scratches. Deep gouges in the rock that looked fresh. Something else had been down here. Recently. Danny's pulse hammered in his ears. He was trapped underground with 4 alien predators, no backup, and apparently some other threat he hadn't accounted for. The rifle felt like a toy in his hands. He had 30 rounds in the magazine and a box of 20 in his pocket. Against creatures that could shrug off small arms fire, it was basically nothing. But he had something they didn't. He knew what desperation could make a human being capable of. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber where old mining equipment lay scattered like dinosaur bones. Rusted ore cars, broken drill bits, coils of cable gone green with oxidation. Danny positioned himself behind an ore car, rifle aimed back the way he'd come. His phone buzzed. Morrison again. He answered it. "You're insane," she said without preamble. "Got their attention, though. Our team has your location." "They're coming in through the western access point. Can you hold for 10 minutes? No promises." The first creature appeared at the tunnel mouth, its body too large for the space, forcing it to compress and contort in ways that defied biology. Its eyes found him immediately, glowing faint green in the flashlight beam. Danny fired. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the creature's center mass and ricocheted off with a spark. The creature didn't even flinch. It started forward, moving in a strange sideways shuffle that let it navigate the tight quarters. Danny fired again, aiming for the eyes. This time he saw impact, a spray of clear fluid, and the creature shrieked so they could be hurt. Good to know. He fired 3 more times in rapid succession, aiming for joints and the thin membrane between armor plates. One shot found a weak spot, punching through into soft tissue. The creature's shriek turned into a gurgle, but it kept coming. Danny backed toward a side passage, firing as he retreated. The second creature entered the chamber from a different tunnel, cutting off his escape route. Danny was boxed in. He dropped the rifle and grabbed a piece of heavy pipe from the mining debris, swinging it like a bat as the first creature lunged. The pipe connected with a sound like a bell being struck, and the creature's head snapped sideways. For a moment, Danny felt a surge of triumph. Glance. Then the creature's neck rotated back into position with a wet crunch, and he realized he hadn't hurt it at all. He'd just made it angry. Glance. The second creature moved in from behind. Danny felt claws rake across his back, tearing through his shirt and scoring the skin beneath. Glance. Pain exploded through his nervous system, white-hot and paralyzing. He stumbled forward, barely avoiding a follow-up strike that would have taken his head off. Glance. His hand found something in the debris, smooth and metallic. A mining explosive, old and probably unstable as hell. Glance. The kind of thing that could bring down a tunnel if you looked at it wrong. Danny grabbed it and 3 more like it, stuffing them in his pockets. Glance. "Morrison," he gasped into the phone. "Tell your team to hurry." Glance. "And tell them to stay back from the mine entrance for about 60 seconds after I give the signal. What are you planning? Something stupid." He ran deeper into the mine, the creatures following, their pursuit relentless and methodical. Glance. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to slow down, buying him precious seconds. Danny's flashlight picked out a vertical shaft ahead, the kind used to access lower levels. Glance. There was no ladder, just a straight drop into darkness. He looked at the explosives in his hand, then at the rotting support beams overhead. Glance. The plan was insane. It violated every survival instinct he had. Glance. But it might just work. Danny activated his phone's camera and propped it against a rock, aiming back down the tunnel. Glance. If this went wrong, at least someone would know what happened. Then he pulled the primer on the first explosive and threw it at the nearest support beam. Glance. Part 4. The explosion was smaller than Danny expected, more of a sharp crack than a boom, but it was enough. The support beam shattered, and the ceiling groaned. Glance. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He jumped into the vertical shaft, praying there was water at the bottom and not just rocks. Glance. There was water. Ice cold and deep. It closed over his head like a fist. Glance. Danny kicked toward what he hoped was the surface. Lungs burning, disoriented in the absolute darkness. His hand hit stone, then found air. Glance. He gasped, treading water, listening to the sounds from above. The ceiling had collapsed, but not completely. Glance. He could hear the creatures digging, their claws scraping through rubble with mechanical efficiency. They weren't giving up. Glance. Danny fumbled for his flashlight, found it miraculously still working, and played the beam around the flooded chamber. He was in an older section of the mine, probably from the original dig in the 1800s. The walls showed pick marks instead of drill patterns, and the water had risen to within a few feet of the ceiling. There was a narrow air gap, barely enough to breathe, and a passage leading deeper into the hillside. Glance. Danny swam toward the passage, his back screaming with every stroke. The claw marks were deeper than he'd thought, and he could feel blood mixing with the water. Glance. The creatures would smell it. They'd track him through solid rock if they had to. Glance. His phone was dead, drowned in the fall. Morrison and her team would have no way to find him down here. Glance. He was on his own, wounded, in an unmapped section of an abandoned mine, being hunted by things that didn't belong on this planet. But he was still alive, and that counted for something. Glance. The passage opened into a cavern that took his breath away. It was huge, easily 100 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows beyond his flashlight's range. Glance. And it wasn't natural. The walls were too smooth, the angles too precise. Glance. Someone, or something, had carved this space out of the living rock. In the center of the cavern stood a structure, Lance. It was made of the same silver metal as the container he'd dug up, covered in the same glowing symbols. But this was bigger, more complex, a framework of interlocking pieces that formed a shape Danny's mind struggled to comprehend. Lance. It hurt to look at directly, the geometry all wrong, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. He approached slowly, water dripping from his clothes, leaving a trail of blood and mine water on the stone floor. Lance. The symbols on the structure shifted as he got closer, rearranging themselves into English like before. Lance. Personnel Manifest, Site 7, Project Threshold. Total specimens contained 47. Lance. Status. Critical failure. Time since breach. 62 years, 7 months, 14 days. Lance. 47. Danny had only seen 4. Lance. That meant 43 more were somewhere in this mine, or worse, already escaped and living in the desert for 6 decades. The thought made him dizzy. Lance. What else had been happening out here while the world went about its business? Ignorant of the horrors buried beneath Arizona's soil, he moved around the structure, reading more symbols. Lance. They told a story, fragmented and incomplete, but enough to piece together the basics. In 1962, something had crashed in New Mexico. Not the Roswell incident everyone knew about, but something else, something the government had managed to keep secret. The craft had been carrying cargo, biological specimens collected from multiple worlds. The military had transported everything to this facility for study, but the creatures were smarter than anyone realized. Lance. They'd learned to manipulate the containment systems, slowly compromising them over months of patient work. When the breach came, it was sudden and total. Lance. The site supervisor, Old Man Whitmore, had barely enough time to activate the burial protocol, entombing himself and the specimens in stasis. For 60 years it had held. Lance. Until Danny showed up with a shovel. The sound of falling rock echoed from the passage behind him. Lance. The creatures had broken through. Danny turned, raising the flashlight like a weapon, knowing it was useless but having nothing else. Lance. 2 of them emerged from the passage, their bodies scraped and bleeding from the collapse, but still moving with that terrifying predatory grace. Then something else appeared behind them. Lance. Something bigger. It moved on 6 legs, each one thick as a telephone pole, supporting a body that had to weigh several tons. Lance. Its hide was armored with overlapping plates that looked like they could stop a tank round. Eyes, dozens of them, covered a head that was mostly mouth, filled with crystalline teeth that ground together with a sound like breaking glass. Lance. The smaller creatures turned to face the newcomer, their body language shifting from predatory to defensive. Danny realized with a shock that they were scared. Lance. Whatever this thing was, it was higher on the food chain. The massive creature made a sound, a deep bass rumble that he felt in his bones. The smaller one scattered, retreating back through the passage. The big one ignored them, focusing its attention on Danny. Lance. It advanced slowly, almost cautiously, head lowering to bring those eyes level with his. Danny stood frozen, waiting for the end. Lance. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This was it. Lance. Then the creature spoke. Not in English, not in any human language, but Danny understood it anyway. Lance. The meaning bypassed his ears entirely, appearing directly in his mind like thoughts that weren't his own. Caretakers. The structure requires maintenance. You will assist. Danny's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice. You can talk? Not talk. Lance. Project. You are compatible. Lance. Rare among your species. What do you want? The structure contains my offspring. Lance. They have been in stasis too long. The systems fail. Lance. Without intervention, they will die. You will prevent this, Lance. Understanding dawned. The smaller creatures weren't random specimens. Lance. They were children, juveniles of this species, and the big one was their parent. It had been sealed in here for 60 years, watching its young slowly suffocate as the containment systems degraded, powerless to help them. Lance. Until Danny opened the door. The ones that got out, Danny said. Lance. They were trying to save the others? Yes, but they are young. Lance. They do not understand your world. They cause damage without intent. Lance. They attacked me. You opened their prison. They did not know you were trying to help. Lance. They only knew fear and rage. Danny looked at the structure, at the symbols cycling through status reports and system warnings. Lance. He was a rancher, not an engineer. He barely understood his own truck's engine, let alone alien technology that had been built before he was born. Lance. But he understood desperation. He understood what it meant to fight for family, to do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep your loved ones safe. Lance. In that, humans and this creature weren't so different. What do I need to do? He asked. Lance. Part 5. The creature, which Danny had started thinking of as Alpha, guided him through the process using projected thoughts that were clearer than any verbal instructions could have been. The structure wasn't just a container. It was a life support system, a suspended animation chamber, and a communication relay all in one. The symbols weren't decoration, Lance. They were the interface. Danny placed his hands on the smooth metal surface, and the symbols flowed under his palms like living things. Lance. Information poured into his mind, overwhelming and alien, but somehow comprehensible. He could see the system architecture, understand the power flows, identify the failing components. Lance. The main fusion cell was depleted, running on less than 2% capacity. In another week, it would fail completely. Lance. The stasis field would collapse, and the 43 juveniles still inside would wake up all at once, starving and terrified, in the middle of an abandoned mine in Arizona. It would be a massacre. Lance. Danny's fingers moved across the symbols. Following Alpha's guidance, he rerouted power from non-essential systems, consolidated the stasis fields. Lance. It wasn't a permanent fix, just enough to buy time. Above ground, he could hear explosions. Lance. Morrison's team had arrived. Lance. They were fighting the juveniles that had escaped, trying to contain a threat they didn't fully understand. Danny needed to stop this before more lives were lost, human or otherwise. Lance. Can you communicate with them? He asked Alpha. The ones outside? Yes, Lance. But they will not return while threatened. Your soldiers will kill them. Lance. Then we need to make the soldiers stop. You cannot command your own people? It's complicated. Danny thought for a moment. Lance. Can you put them to sleep? The young ones? There was a pause while Alpha considered. Lance. It is possible, but the process requires proximity. Lance. I must go to them. You're too big. Lance. You'll never make it through those tunnels. I have been confined for 62 years. Lance. I will find a way. The massive creature turned and moved toward the passage, its body compressing in ways that seemed physically impossible, flowing through spaces that should have been far too small. Glance. Danny watched it go, then turned his attention back to the structure. The power levels had stabilized, but they were still critically low. Glance. He needed a better solution. His eyes fell on the emergency kit he dropped near the entrance. Glance. Inside was a road flare, waterproof matches, and a hand-crank radio. Not much, but it gave him an idea. Glance. Danny activated the radio and started cranking, building up a charge. The structure responded immediately, symbols brightening, power levels ticking upward. It could harvest electromagnetic energy. Not efficiently, not enough to sustain itself long-term, but enough to prove a concept. Glance. He pulled out his phone, useless and waterlogged, but the battery was still intact. He pried it open and connected the leads to the structure's surface. Glance. The symbols rearranged themselves, forming new pathways. More power flowed in. Outside, the sounds of combat had changed. The explosion stopped, replaced by confused shouting. Glance. Alpha must have reached the juveniles. Glance. Danny hoped Morrison's team had the sense not to shoot the parent creature. That would end badly for everyone. Glance. Footsteps echoed from the passage. Danny turned, ready to fight or run. But it was Morrison who emerged, followed by 6 soldiers in armor that looked more science fiction than military. Glance. They had weapons drawn, but lowered them when they saw Danny was alone. "Mr. Carter," Morrison said, breathing hard. Glance. "You're alive." Disappointed? Surprised. "We tracked 4 bogies into this mine." Glance. "We saw you jump into that shaft. Nobody survives a fall like that." Glance. "I got lucky. There was water." Glance. One of the soldiers was scanning the cavern with a device that clicked and hummed. "Lieutenant, you need to see this. We're reading massive energy signatures from that structure." Glance. "And life signs. Lots of them." Glance. Morrison approached the structure slowly, her expression shifting from tactical focus to something like awe. "This is a containment vessel. A big one." Glance. She looked at Danny. "Did you open this too?" Glance. "It was already here. Has been since 63. Glance. There are 43 more creatures inside, still in stasis, and they're not hostiles." Glance. "They're kids." Kids. Glance. "You're saying these things have families?" "The big one outside is their parent. It's been trapped down here for 60 years, watching them slowly die." Glance. "The 4 that escaped were trying to save the others." Morrison's jaw tightened. Glance. "That doesn't change the fact that they're dangerous. We've had reports of livestock killed, structures damaged." Glance. "One of my soldiers got hurt in the initial engagement because they're scared and confused," Danny said. Glance. "They've been locked in a box since before you were born. Of course they're not acting right." Glance. "But they're not monsters. They're just lost." Glance. "And what exactly do you propose we do with them?" "Help them." Morrison stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Help them." Glance. "You want the United States military to provide aid and comfort to a species we know nothing about, that has already demonstrated aggressive behavior. I want us to not make the same mistake we made in 63. Glance. "Your people, my people, we imprisoned innocent beings because we were afraid. We kept them locked up for decades, let them suffer, and pretended the problem would go away." Glance. "Well, it didn't go away. It's right here, and we have a choice." Glance. We can kill them all and feel real tough about it, or we can do the right thing. One of the soldiers spoke up. Lieutenant, the parent creature has successfully sedated all 4 juveniles. Lance. They're unconscious, but stable. No further threat. Lance. Morrison's expression softened slightly. What do they need? Lance. To survive, I mean. Danny consulted the information flowing from the structure. Power, primarily. Lance. The stasis system can keep them stable for years, maybe decades, but the fusion cell is almost dead. They need a new power source, something sustainable. Lance. We could bring in a generator. Not enough. This thing needs serious energy. Lance. Megawatts, continuously, for potentially centuries. Morrison thought for a moment, then spoke into a radio. Command, this is Morrison. Lance. I need you to connect me with the Department of Energy. Priority channel. Lance. Over the next hour, Danny watched as Morrison coordinated a response that was equal parts military operation and humanitarian mission. Technicians arrived with equipment, scientists who specialized in xenobiology, engineers who took one look at the structure and started making plans. Alpha remained nearby, watching everything with those dozens of eyes, projecting a sense of cautious hope. Lance. The juveniles were brought back to the cavern one by one, still unconscious, and placed in specialized containment pods that the military had apparently been keeping ready for exactly this scenario. Lance. Danny learned that Site 7 wasn't the only facility. There were others scattered across the American Southwest, all dealing with the aftermath of that night in 1962 when something fell from the sky carrying passengers from a dozen different worlds. Lance. Most of the sites had been successfully maintained. A few had failed catastrophically. Lance. Site 7 had been somewhere in between, forgotten but not quite abandoned. As the sun set above ground, Danny found himself sitting on a boulder near the structure, watching the controlled chaos of the rescue operation. Lance? Morrison sat down next to him, offering a bottle of water. You did good work today, she said. Lance. Saved a lot of lives, human and otherwise. I just didn't want anyone else to die in a hole in the ground. The Department of Energy is sending a prototype fusion reactor. Experimental design, but it should provide enough power for centuries. Lance. We're also establishing a permanent monitoring station. This facility will be properly maintained from now on. Lance. What about Alpha and the juveniles? Once they're stabilized, we'll evaluate options. There may be a way to return them to their home world. Lance. We've been working on portal technology based on recovered artifacts. It's not ready yet, but in a few years, maybe. Lance. Danny nodded slowly. Old man Whitmore. You said he's still down here. Morrison's expression became somber. In the original containment chamber. Lance. Do you want to see? They walked through newly secured tunnels, past soldiers standing guard and scientists taking readings. The original chamber was smaller than the cavern, carved into bedrock and reinforced with that same silver metal. Lance. In the center, preserved perfectly by the stasis field, was a man in his 70s wearing a 1960s-era suit and tie. His face was calm, resigned. Lance. He knew what he was doing, Morrison said quietly. When the breach happened, he could have run. Lance. Could have saved himself. Lance. Instead, he activated the protocol knowing it would trap him inside. He bought time for the town to evacuate, for the military to respond. He died a hero. Danny looked at the peaceful face of a man who'd made the ultimate sacrifice for strangers he'd never meet. Can we get him out? Lance. Give him a proper burial? The stasis field is linked to the containment system. If we remove him, the whole thing could destabilize. Lance. He stays until we find a better solution. Then we make sure people remember him. Lance. Build a monument. Tell his story. Lance. Some stories are classified, Mr. Carter? Not this one. Not anymore. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Lance. I'll see what I can do. 3 months later, Danny stood in front of a crowd gathered at the old Whitmore Ranch. The property was now a government facility, fenced and guarded, but today they'd opened it for a ceremony. A granite monument had been erected near the dig site where this had all started, bearing a simple inscription. John Whitmore, 1891, Lance, 1963. He stood between worlds and chose compassion. Lance. The official story was vague on details, citing classified military operations and national security, but the core truth was there. A man had died saving lives. That was enough. Alpha attended, brought up from below in a specialized vehicle that groaned under its weight. Lance. The creature stood at the back of the crowd, silent and still, paying respects to someone it had never met but whose sacrifice had preserved its family. Morrison gave a speech about duty and courage. Lance. The governor said some words. Danny didn't pay much attention to the talking. Lance. He was looking at the desert, at the empty blue sky, thinking about all the secrets buried in this red soil, all the stories that had never been told. His ranch was gone, sold to the government for more money than he knew what to do with. Lance. But he'd been hired as a civilian consultant for the project, helping to bridge the gap between human understanding and alien needs. It turned out that ranching and xenobiology had more in common than anyone expected. Lance. Both required patience, empathy, and a willingness to get your hands dirty. That evening, after the ceremony, Danny returned to the cavern one last time. Lance. The fusion reactor hummed steadily, providing clean, continuous power to the stasis systems. The juveniles slept peacefully in their pods. Lance. Alpha rested nearby, finally able to relax after 60 years of helpless vigil. The big creature's thoughts touched Danny's mind gently. Lance. You honor Whitmore. This is good. Lance. He deserves to be remembered. So do you all. We have no monuments. Lance. Our kind does not build such things. Maybe that can change. Lance. Maybe that's something humans and your people can teach each other. Perhaps. Alpha shifted, settling its massive bulk more comfortably. Tell me, Daniel Carter, do you regret digging in that soil? Danny thought about everything that had happened, all the fear and pain and wonder. Lance. He thought about a man who died alone in the dark, and a parent who'd endured decades of torment rather than abandon its children, and the strange, terrible, beautiful truth that life existed beyond Earth, and sometimes it needed help, just like anyone else. No, he said finally. Lance, I don't regret it at all. Above them, the desert stars emerged one by one. The same stars that shone on worlds Danny had never heard of, where creatures he couldn't imagine lived lives as complex and meaningful as his own. Lance. The universe was bigger and stranger than he'd ever dreamed, and somewhere in this vast cosmic ocean there was room for both human compassion and alien hope. The ranch was empty, but the truth buried in its soil had changed everything. Lance. And that, Danny thought, was worth all the fear and chaos and blood. Lance. Because now, at least, they could move forward together, building something better than the mistakes of the past. Alpha's thoughts whispered one last message before fading into comfortable silence. Lance, thank you, friend. Danny smiled in the darkness and headed for the surface, leaving the sleeping giants to their dreams.